Okay, are we all set? Thank you. I'll turn it over to Deanna for a minute and about the election. So.
Thank you, Chair Kershaw. We just wanted to give the committee the opportunity, if you'd like to keep the current chair and vice chair, given that we have less than a year before the next election and we only have one more meeting, and we will be making some changes to the committee election of chair and vice chair in the future and how frequently we do that. But I'll defer to the committee to decide what you'd like to do.
Nominate Director Kershaw.
You'd like to leave it the same?
Oh, yeah.
So maybe we'll just get a show of hands to see who would just like to keep it the same. All right, Chair Kershaw, you will continue.
Thank you. I would like to start off the meeting by saying good morning, and the TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district. And today we are located in the Cumberland-Shrubnik territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of Shrubnik Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnerships that we have with the Cumberland-Shrubnik and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. We'll call the meeting to order. And are there any additions or deletions from the agenda? If not, have somebody so move, please. Second, all in favor? Thank you. And move the minutes of the September the 21st as moved. Yeah. Second, all in favor? Opposed? None? Okay, I'll turn it over to Jamie and we'll on rural broadband.
Thank you, Chair Kershaw. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to introduce our presentation, but I wanted to give a little bit of background ahead of that. So first of all, I wanted to address the recent announcement that came out from the provincial government and Government of Canada just 2 days ago, and I believe everyone received that via email from Scott last night. But it's great news. We don't know exactly what it means yet, but the good news is that federal and provincial governments combined are investing up to $830 million to broadband connectivity in rural areas. So at a high level, their program target, it actually seems quite lofty, again, which is good news. 98% of Canadians to have high-speed internet by 2026. The provincial, so that's the federal target. The provincial target is having 100% of BC communities with high-speed internet by 2027. We don't know exactly how this funding is going to be rolled out yet, whether it's going to be grants that are accessible by local governments or accessible by telecoms. So that detail will still come. But it's very timely having that announcement because this presentation we're about to see. So ahead of introducing iValley, who's going to present to us, I wanted to kind of bring this committee back up to speed with where we're at on our broadband connectivity project. So if you'll remember, in about a year ago, May of 2021, we had a consultant report done by a company called Tanix Engineering that did a full broadband, what do we call it here? The Regional District Broadband Strategy. And what that was essentially an assessment of the entire TNRD, looking at the state of the nation and where we are with broadband connectivity, and then recommendations of how to move forward to actually address these gaps. So the strategy was not specific enough of here's the solutions. It was identifying the state of the nation and going down to the detail of breaking up into different communities that could be focused on as areas to develop broadband from. So that's where we're at. So since then, Ron Story in the past was working towards what possible solutions there are. And he's the one actually who first connected with iValley, who's going to present to us here. And so what iValley is going to present is one of the possible solutions for the TNRD to address this obvious gap in service. So back to the announcement of having BC wanting 100% high-speed internet by 2027, referring back to our this TANX report that was done just a year ago. At that time, 15% of households in the TNRD rural areas only had high-speed internet. So meeting that requirements of what they classify as high speed. So we have a long way to go to get there. So what iValley is going to present? So it's iValley's, they're called iValley Intelligent Community Association. So they're a nonprofit Canadian organization that specializes in working with local governments to develop broadband solutions. And as you'll see in their presentation, their focus is on solutions that are run by the local government and owned by the local government. So we actually have three presenters. So on your agenda here, it refers to Geetshwar Anand. He's going to be one of the presenters, as well as Roll Court and Barry Gander. Now there was an issue with our Zoom link, so Barry's up there under Geetshwar's name as well. So without further ado, I will pass it over to them to take on the presentation.
And Geetshwar, you are muted.
I'm so sorry about that. Thanks, Jamie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is Geeteshwar and I'm located very close to you. I'm in Armstrong in British Columbia. And Jamie already introduced iValley. I just want to add one line, and Roel will take you through a bit more in the presentation, that iValley is currently doing the largest rural broadband community initiative project in Nova Scotia. Our two very experienced founders are Terry Dalton, who's not on the call, and Barry Gander, whose name is now being corrected. They have experience of many projects in Eastern, Central, and Western Canada. Barry is the co-founder of iValley and an expert on community networks and smart rural regions. Roel is a telecom engineer like myself, and he's based in North Vancouver. He's an expert on open access networks, FTTH, and very innovative solutions for community networks. And I have experience, I'm 2 years old in Canada. I have experience from very rural geographies in Africa and Southeast Asia of planning, deploying, and operating networks. Over to Roel, who will take us through.
Thank you, Geeteshwar. Directors, thank you very much for the time that you have allocated to us. I'll start to be brief and to the point. I'm going to share my screen with you. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. So yes, we would like to start with what Jamie mentioned, is that the TANX report. The TANX report was was a very well written document that really identified the issues that is happening in the Thompson-Nicola regional district. And I thought it would be an opportunity to show this map here, to show all the areas here that requires our attention to bring broadband to these underserved areas. I like to talk to the next topics. We would like to talk a little bit about the challenge, what we think we understand it. We would like to talk about the proposed solution, not only from a technical perspective, but as well from a business model, a turnkey model, and how we're going to fund this. But before I go and move on, I'd like to ask Barry to give us a quick overview about what iValley is and why we think that we are your ideal partner in making this solution work for you. Barry?
Thank you very much, Roel. And it's a pleasure to be almost with you today. I spent many years in BC and loved every minute of it. Now I'm in Nova Scotia for my sins, but having a great time. Let me correct one of the earlier statements that, in fact, iValley is building the largest rural community network in Canada, not just in Nova Scotia. And what we do is build a network that invites other suppliers and ISPs to be part of it. That's called open access. And we do that in order to drive competition, to help lower the prices and provide the best service to the community. We're about giving everybody a chance to compete on an open network. And we won world-class competitions. We're about working things to the global best, not just to a Canadian best. And we won the first Smart Rural Region ISO certification from the World Council on City Data. Right now, we're working with CBC TV on a special on rural broadband documentary here in Nova Scotia. We are the leading expert in Canada on intelligent communities because we have the leading expert in Canada on intelligent communities, Bill Hutchison, working with us. He's our chair of awards and grants. And iValley has been very, very fortunate in getting federal grants for intelligent networks. And we've created, and this is something Roel will dash through right now, a unique solution for very remote areas called SABRE, Standalone Broadband for Rural Environments. Thank you very much, Roel.
All right, thank you, Barry. Yes, so we acknowledge that that the TANEX report is completely correct. This is what you see here is a CERA report, and basically what it shows, the red dots are the residents in the area that has below 10 megabits per second. The blue ones are 50 megabits per second. So the amount of red dots that you see in here really emphasizes the problem that exists in the regional district. Before we start talking to the solution for what we would like to propose, I'd like to put everything in context. And for this, we're going to be a little bit technical because I'd like to share with you a diagram that shows the data path through the internet. The internet is represented by the cloud here, and every telecommunication provider is connected to that internet cloud through a backbone or a core network. The symbols that you see over here are just switches that switches data between different nodes, so it travels as fast as possible from where it needs to go. The last part is the part that connects to the houses. And here you see traditionally a Talos and a Shaw would have a distribution node, and the distribution node would just have a copper connection to the house, a coax connection, or a fiber connection. And sometimes they will provide a wireless links point to point when doable. And some households might have directionally have contact with satellites, what is not really an incumbent thing, but it would be a connection like ExploreNet. The reason why the incumbents are not providing any connectivity in the rural areas is because the cost to install these copper and coax and fiber plants is way too expensive, and they have a return of investment what is between 4 and 5 years. So they are not interested in participating in this rural in rural deployment, and that's the reason what we see here is it is not viable for them. So what do we propose? Well, we propose to do it a little bit different. We still are going to use the same kind of backbones what already exists, but we are going just to offer you a kind of solution that do a mix of different connectivities. And that mix will be a fiber link that you can connect to the home from that location. We're going to provide a wireless point-to-point link that you can point to houses from a node. And there's one technology that is completely new, but not completely new, but it is a technology that is using the TV white space. And TV white space is using a frequency band that was the same frequencies that was used for TV signals. Maybe you remember these antennas on the roofs that you had to receive your TV signals. Well, the same frequencies are used here. One of these advantages of using these frequencies is that it can reach a very long range. It can reach about 10 to 20 kilometers. If you compare that to the 5 kilometers of long-time evolution, that is the mobile networks from the incumbents, or Wi-Fi, what is only 1,000 meters. So this technology is really a technology that we think is very well applicable for rural communities. The other thing that is happening that is recently is the satellite links. So especially the low Earth orbiting satellites. The satellite links have the opportunity just to transport very, very high capacity data from the ground to the satellite, between the satellites, and then to the ground again. Examples from them are Starlink that provides end-to-end service to an end user. You will have OneWeb and Telesat that will just provide services to more municipalities and enterprises. So the combination of these technologies for the past years allows us to come up with this concept that we call SABRE. and Cyber stands for standalone broadband for rural environment. And it looks like a little bit like this. There is a container that is placed in the middle of a community, and that container can connect to the homes via fiber optic cables. If the community chooses to build their own network, we provide a kit, and that kit is available so that we can just connect it up, connect the houses through fiber optics. The container has as well a wireless component and a long-term evolution mobile component that can be included, or 5G if that is required. The meat is, of course, the TV white space. That is the TV space antenna that connects to all these houses about 10 to 15 kilometers away from the node and allows to have broadband. This is for the section of connecting the houses with this kind of local technologies. All the technologies available here are as an option for you to choose from. To backhaul the data to the internet, we have a couple of options. I talked earlier about the LEO satellite, the low Earth orbiting satellites, and this is one of the ways we can communicate the data from this area all the way to the satellite to the internet exchange. However, there are other options as well when there is fiber in the vicinity, and there is fiber through the Thompson Regional District. And we think that we can use some of that fiber to connect these containers all the way to the internet. So this is a solution that is a standalone solution that use technologies that is off-the-shelf vendors. So the only thing what we need to do is put it together and switch on and switch it on. Well, from a technical perspective, that would be the case. But from a business perspective, it is a little bit different. Let me run you through how an internet service provider works and how it should be applicable, how we can apply it for this concept. So this is what I call an open access business model, and it has the following parties. We have an end user that will receive the internet access and all the services on his computer and on his TV. He will pay a certain subscription, an access subscription, to a communication service provider. So the communication service provider is the organization that will provide the internet access from the backbone provider and bring it to the end user. It will collect dollars from the end user and it will pay the backbone provider. The communication service provider as well provide, besides the connectivity, support. So in case that there is an outage, it will be able to troubleshoot and help the customer. Typically, service providers you've seen are, of course, the large incumbents, but there are some smaller available as well. And especially in your region, you have some wireless internet service providers that could fulfill this role in here. Or it could be a community as communication service provider that's been chosen by your community to provide the services to you. So the money that has flown from the end user to the communication service provider, there is some money that needs to go to the equipment, to the container and the radios. And so that communication service provider is going to lease that infrastructure from the network owner. So the way we see it here is that the network owner will be the community itself, in this case, the regional district. The regional district will purchase all this equipment and will receive money from the communication service provider as part of the lease. That money is used then just to pay back the debt that is required for the capital implementation of the network. And that these parties could be the public-private partnership, a federal or provincial funding, or the local and private funding. So this model shows a revenue stream from the communication service provider to the network owner to pay back the debt. So this models has been implemented in communities like Coquitlam and with QNet, with fiber in New Westminster and in Campbell River. The advantage of this is that it is a business plan that funds itself over the long term, similar to what water does. It is a utility that is paid for, and the revenues that you will obtain from this communication service provider will pay back the network in about 20 to 25 years, similar to what it will do for a fiber optic network in a very dense urban area. So we think this model is operating, it's working very successfully in the municipality that I mentioned from a fiber perspective, and communication service providers that we are using are very used to this model. They like to lease the infrastructure, the existing infrastructure from another party, provide the services and pay an amount of dollars for that lease. So this is the way we operate. or what we suggest we should operate. And I'd like to talk now about the community benefits. What will this kind of broadband bring other than money to the network owner? It will bring some more than that. And I'd like to ask Barry to jump in and to talk about the community broadband benefits.
Just one moment. Did you have any questions, Director Ellis, or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have quite a few. So, do you want them to finish this before we get into that?
Did you want to finish before you have questions, or you want to continue?
It might be better if we just continued, and I would appreciate that it might isolate your questions from what the conclusion of the presentation is, but then you have more information to go back to when we conclude the presentation, if that's okay.
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, just very briefly then on community benefits, and this is what the network is all about and all for. The problem with the present model where the telecom provider is the only game in town is that they're only interested in the revenues that go back to their shareholders in Toronto or wherever, but the community is interested in a different set of values. If you have a community broadband system under your belt, you can have a digital town hall, as it were, where the services that the region is using are provided over the region's own network. And that all becomes then very, very inexpensive and easy to do. It provides you with a smart energy network that you can use to monitor utilities and save money on the network. It provides you with smart education services where you bring in the global best instruction and provide services to students such that they're not blocked from weather days, which we've had here in Nova Scotia quite a bit this year. The smart agriculture is something that's a natural. There are drones that do remote crop sensing and soil sensing. Farmers use it for analysis. And the little picture there says even cows wear Fitbits now. And that's true. The automation of farming is proceeding very, very quickly. Smart healthcare, of course. We're involved in a prosthetic limb e-delivery system that's unusual and very inexpensive. Smart traffic and security, community CCTVs and emergency control, and smart wastewater. And those are only a few of the areas. We found that what's happening here is that overall you get about a 10-fold return on every public dollar invested in broadband that comes back to the community. One of our models of use is in Stratford, Ontario, which has 3-time job growth, 4-time construction growth, $1.5 million a year going to the city. And I realize that that's a metropolitan area, not a spread out rural community, but it will be the same with the community that we're doing here in Pictou County in Nova Scotia and in other places. That same kind of return will hold true. And now I'll turn it over, I think, to Roel again for the turnkey model.
Yes, thank you, Barry. Yeah, so what we would like to propose is what we call a turnkey model. And that means that we believe that we have the expertise to do all this. We think that we should have an open access community infrastructure. We would build the nodes in the underserved area, these containers. We will take care of all the backhaul providers. That could be the satellites, and it could be the fiber optics that is already available in the region. We would contact the communication service providers from your choice and see which one would be interested in leasing that equipment and pay you for the use of that of the infrastructure. And we would, of course, establish the business and operation process with the TNRD if you wish, at the level of involvement that you wish to be involved in. The other part that we are good at is working on the capital and operational funding. We have an extensive contact with different funding partners. We are successful in applying for grants, and that is the part of the turnkey that we offer, not only the technology, the business, but as well as the funding. And we think that since it is owned by the community, it is one of the best and the most strongest way forward and the most sustainable way forward. So let me check quickly an overview. What is the roadmap to funding? The first one is to establish the baseline. And when you have a baseline, you have an analysis done, a gap analysis done, you can move on to the next step. And the next step is a strategic implementation plan. And that encompasses to understand the build cost of the network, you understand the business plan itself, what are the revenues that are coming in from the service providers, what is the construction cost, and a high level project plan on how we're going just to deliver this kind of connectivity and what will be the priorities to do so. Another component important to discuss about it is the governance models. So how are we going to govern this entity? Will it be a different department under the TNRD? Will it be a crown corporation? Will it be a public-private partnership? These are all subject to discussions and are important for the continuity of this kind of endeavor. And when we have that, we can just start talking with the investors and say, hey, this is the plan that we have. This is what we want to do. This is the return on investment that we see happening. There are the benefits for the community. Would you be interested to participate in funding the TNRD with for this project? When all that has been done, we think we can start designing the network, identifying what kind of options you would like to see in every area you want to cover, and then operationalize it and make sure that the lease revenues are funding it and everything is as it should be and designed for. The good thing about this roadmap is that you already have done the broadband gap analysis. You already have a strategic broadband plan. So that part is completed, and that is an essential step to obtain funding. So the next steps is something what we probably can help you with. So what we would like to propose to you is that we become your funding champion for your premises connection plans. We will write a business plan. We're going to be a strategic plan and find out what the selected options are you prefer. We will work on the governance models options and with you, and we will just find the fundings and bring on the table so you can discuss with them what is the kind of funding model that you would see best. In the step 2, of course, we would deliver the network and provide all the required operating and contracts, the issues that are required to operate this network. So as a conclusion, we think that Saber is the solution for rural communities. It is based on off-the-shelf, so there is no new technology involved. It is community owned, meaning that the incumbents are not involved in here. If your community requires an increase in speed or has, for example, Internet of Things added to their services, well, that is something you can decide by yourself. You don't have to go back to the incumbent. And that makes the community on just networks so powerful. We have a track record in finding funding, private and public funding, and we will do everything we can just to make sure that we got all these options on the table for you to choose for. We could talk about a pilot, which could be selected by you and by us as well, because we want to make it a success with the technology that we have. And what we propose as a next step is to develop a roadmap. So based on the TANEX report to support the future grants. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy would be happy to answer any questions that you may have on this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions from Director Elliott and Director Roth?
Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. I've got a couple of questions. One of them is that we would be holding permits under the CRTC.
Yes, there is. It is a formality, though. The CRTC requires a registration as a non-dominant carrier, and that is what you would be in this case. It is a formality that the CRTC wants to see everybody registered that is providing network connectivity through the country.
Okay, and then I have another question. I have 5 small communities, not that are rural, that are under the regional district and not municipalities, that are not within 10 kilometers of each other. And so that means you would put a station in each of those communities?
The system we designed can handle between 30 up to 90 different houses or residents.
I'm not worried about the houses. I'm worried about the distance between houses. There's no place that I've got that many.
Yes, the fast answer is yes, we could put, or we would put a saver unit in each of those communities because they're so far apart.
And would they be funded strictly through the TNRD?
It was funded through a plan that TNRD has approved. And let me say that it doesn't have to be the regional district that's providing the funding. We can bring in P3 providers and others for your approval. And if you like to go that route, that's fine too. And let me stress too that when we say community owned, I'd like to change that stress to community governed. You don't actually have to own the network yourself. That's one option, but as long as you're writing the rules on how the owner of the network should operate, then you don't need to own the actual network itself. And many communities go that route because they don't want to be bothered with ownership.
And so the ownership would be the ones that would maintain?
Yes, they'd be the ones making sure that your network stayed within the guide rails and performed as it should. They'd be the ones who you squeeze if something goes wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Director Rothenberger.
Thanks very much. It's a question about, I guess, the competition aspect of it. I'm under the impression, maybe mistakenly, but it looks to me as though there is a bit of a race starting now for provision of service to more rural areas, largely spurred by Starlink, although access to that particular service is still kind of sketchy depending on where you are. But you know, they're putting up a few dozen satellites pretty much every week, so that service can become more and more easily available. And my question is, my feeling is that when it comes to these types of services, it's always preferable if there's a private option available than for government to be coming involved in providing a service. And so I wondered if you could comment on that, on the cost, for example, of a private provision of service versus a community-based provision of service when you consider the tax implications and the subscription costs, and compare the two as to why the kind of scenario you present would be better than just leaving it to the private sector to provide, which I think now they're, as I say, they're starting to become interested in. And at the local level, would the funding come from a service area? Would there be service areas established in these rural communities, or would it be at-large funding as you see it?
To start with, this is not a service that the government is going to provide. The government, in this case, the TNRD, is going to make available an infrastructure, make available a container, a fiber network, a radio network, and will lease that out to commercial parties as they see fit, and they will provide the services. It is your choice of which kind of commercial provider, communication provider you're going to have on that network. You can make a beauty contest. So it is not the government's going to provide a service. That is the first one. The second one is you're talking about Starlink and the likes. The Starlink is not a community-owned network, meaning that you're always depending on the whims of an Elon Musk or any foreign company in this case that's going to dictate what you can and cannot do on the network. The satellite is certainly an option, but Starlink is only there for individuals. So you are not going to have the community network as we described it here. You're going to use Starlink there where a community network is not feasible. For example, a house that is so far away that it is not economical feasible to put a container or a Sabro node in that vicinity. By owning and managing your own network, your community can add anything that they need instead of being dependent on somebody else. So I think that this network is something what is not government proposed, but in which you make the infrastructure available to commercial parties to thrive on such a network and provide services to the end users.
It's a bit like the road system. We don't have a different road system built by Ford and another one built by GM and another one built by Mazda. The government provides the road system, and all the other manufacturers can put their cars on that road. And that's all we're doing, is providing a system whereby the Taluses and Bells and so on, they can put their services on that network. So that's what people see at the end. We also have a way of providing what we call over-the-top service for television and services like that, if no other provider is available. So it's a safety net that we can put in.
Director Rothenberger.
Thanks. I think one of my questions is, or was meant to be, the comparable cost to the end user. Starlink, for example, there's about an $800, I believe, setup fee, and then the monthly rate is actually very comparable or competitive with Mascon and ExploreNet, although the service is far superior. So what do you visualize as a comparable cost?
The cost we have seen so far, sorry, Barry, the cost that we propose for is similar to what you would see from Starlink and similar to what you see in urban areas, between $100 and $120 per subscription.
Except there wouldn't be the huge upfront cost of putting in the dish of $800.
Exactly.
And overall, well, let me add that the publicly provided or structured systems like this are faster and much cheaper than systems put in by private companies. There's an organization in New York-based organization called the Intelligent Community Forum. And in all the 20 years they've been giving out awards for the most intelligent community in the world, and hundreds apply to those awards each year, they've never been able to give an award to a system built by a private company, because those systems are always more expensive and they're not future-proof. They don't change as fast as a publicly dictated system does. If you have a public system, you can put more money in it faster, and you can future-proof it better, and make the service cheaper than you would if it was a privately provided service.
Thank you. Director Watson.
My question has been answered.
Thank you.
Mr.
Director
Chairman,
Rice.
Mr. Chairman, Director Rice has had his hand up there for.
Yeah, and that's why I just called his name.
I'm honored to get so much attention here as the I think the loan and Barry, you sort of began to answer my question. I'm just going to get a little clarification from you on sharing the road, as your analogy put it. That sort of cleared it up in my head a little bit. So I'm going to do a little bit of a comparison. What we've had down here in my area is with the wildfires and floods. TELUS has built in and provided us with a fiber network within the last couple months, and that's the Lytton corridor right on through. And I see they're putting TELUS fiber in on Highway 8. So from Lytton to Merritt, we're going to have a brand new solid. So the way I understand it, the listening to you is, so you would approach TELUS at some point and say, hey, because let's face it, rural is not a big money maker for somebody like TELUS when your subscribers are low and your network is large. And you would approach TELUS and then say, okay, this is what we want to do. And then that's how the relationship would begin. And then my second question would be, the providers like TELUS or Rogers and stuff like that, are they sort of receptive to something like this? I guess those are my two questions.
That's well asked, in fact. And if you're asking me, because I was the one shooting the answer forward to it, yes, that's exactly right. The fact is that a TELUS or a Bell if they have a fiber network going in there, we would use that to backbone the TV white space and build off it. There's no point in trying to double build something. And I want to make sure that we understand that we have nothing against the private networks. I myself worked for years with Bell Canada over in Saudi Arabia, so I know what a private network is, and they're good people and good companies. They know what they're doing, and their problem is that they're trapped in a 3 to 5 year return on investment model that doesn't allow them to build out to the rural areas the way they might like to otherwise. I'm sure that all my colleagues who are engineers in those companies are chafing at the bit to be able to drive a fiber line down the highway to a rural area, but in fact they can't do it. But what we can do is put a transmitter, as it were, off that fiber and serve that whole area. And that's why in fact, we have to do a bit of a model to find out where those lines are now, where they're going to evolve to, so we can do a future-based plan and make the connections with the TELUS and so on that will allow us to move in very, very quickly. But I'm sorry, Roel, I think I cut you off.
No, this is exactly what, thank you very much, Barry. This is exactly that. I'd like to answer the second question, and it is the service provider. Yes, a TELUS or a Bell can become the service providers and lease that container from the owner and just provide the services. We see that usually they won't do that because it is not what they call a cut cookie. And a cut cookie is what they usually do, and it is a connection to the home, that is a wireless connection to a phone. And this is something very special that will take them a long time to integrate in their operational processes. So we think, and we know that ISPs will be interested in leasing that container from you, and they will become the service provider locally. We have one already lined up in one of the pilots that we do in BC, and that service provider is going to provide TV over the top over TV white space, and we're going to prove that this whole concept is working properly, and that this model is something what the commercial service provider likes to work with as well.
Thank you.
I just want to add a little thing here to what Roel and Barry said, is that you don't have to take service from TELUS, essentially lease that infrastructure from them and open it up to more service providers. So the user has options of maybe 4 service providers versus 1.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you. Director Schaefer.
If I understood you right, you said that when you go into a community, you can service 30 to 90 houses. What about the communities that are larger? So what's the maximum you can service in a community?
We can serve as many as required by adding more of these kind of nodes. So we put the number between 30 and 90 from a business modeling perspective. What is the number that makes it affordable? And the number I found is about 60, but we can easily increase it to 150 if required, if you have larger communities than that. And if that's the case, you might even not consider using a container, but perhaps having a brick and mortar building in which you would put the equipment in when you need to serve a number that is larger than, for example, 100, 150 houses. And these are options that we're going to submit to you for your consideration and make recommendations on the best way to move forward.
We have been focusing, I realize, on rural situations, but you have larger communities than that. And if in a larger plan, we would include those in a different way, where, for example, one of the people who helped Toronto win its award for Intelligent Community Forum work. So we're working with large cities, and that's not a problem.
These are rural areas. Like in my area, I've got 5 different little communities, and a couple of them, 2 or 3 of them have well over 90 people, 90 homes in them.
That is no issue at all. That makes the business plan even better to make this work. So absolutely. And from a technical perspective, there is no issue whatsoever. We can serve that. The number we put forward was from modeling perspective, and we will adapt easily depending on the size of the community we need to serve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions. We've had some experience in getting radio and television the old way, and CRTC has demanded, and we've provided some extensive engineering. Is that part of this project?
Yes.
Would that be part of this project? And who would pay for that?
Right. So this, yes, it is a radio survey is important because we want to make sure that when you install a container with a mast somewhere in the community, that everybody has access to it from a radio perspective. So yes, there is a radio analysis that is going to be done. There is some other analysis that we need to make sure to provide that services, and that's all part of the plan. So each container, each location we're going to put this system in there will have an extensive survey done, and that is all part of the cost in providing that container in that location.
Thank you. I've got a community of 30 to 40 people. One of these seems like it might fit, but it'll all be down to cost. You relate to connecting to the fiber network, and all these are owned by the big telcos. Has there, or do you anticipate any trouble or any problems gaining access to that?
Many problems as a user when you work with an incumbent. No, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be solved. We have contact with different providers, with the different incumbents, and when there is a business plan for them to be made and money for them to be made, they will just play ball. And so we know they do, because we have access to fiber optics for that pilot project we do in the middle of nowhere near Williams Lake for the TD white space. So it will not be easy, but it is not impossible. And I expect that eventually they will see the value in working with us in connecting all these containers with fiber optics, because at the end of the day, it is a money game, and they will just generate extra revenues by just leasing the capacity to us.
Thank you. I think I have one more here. No, it's pretty much been answered. Thank you.
The other thing that your question is bringing to the fore is that, and somebody else was asking this earlier about CRTC application. The more you can have done ahead of this large application that's just been announced, the more preparation work you can have done before you put in an application to that, the better your chances are of winning that. So this is, in a sense, future-proofing your application for more money when you're going through all of this and presenting them with a plan that's going to work. This is not just a whim or a dream. This is something that will be able to be actually engineered and done for a certain amount of money, and you can point to places where the money is going to be spent. So it's quite powerful in that way.
Supplementary, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Supplementary
Go ahead.
question.
In our area, the regional district already owns radio and TV retransmitter towers. Can they be reutilized, for better of a lack of description?
Yes, if you have an infrastructure that is already in place, we will use as much as we can just to reduce the cost. That makes totally sense. So you would love to see what you have in place and how we can accommodate to bring broadband through these infrastructures to your constituents.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Gillis.
Thanks, Chair Kershaw. I heard you mention a couple of things. So one of them was payback period for the investor, whether it be this government body or whether it be a public-private partnership or whatever. And I also heard you mention the term, I think, future-proof. My concern is that the technology is moving so quickly that well, to be candid, I can't even operate my telephone properly anymore. I'm already due for a new one. And so I'm concerned, is there not a danger that we, or whoever the investor is, will 15 years from now be paying for an obsolete system?
The danger, in fact,
because of some technological advance that none of us has even imagined yet.
You're quite right in the speed of the technological advance, and this is one of Starlink's fragilities. It hasn't got capacity in it to advance quickly to the next phase of the size of bandwidth that's going to be needed. If you have your own system, the communities tend to put in a system that is more robust than the private sector puts in, because they're planning for their own future. A private sector puts in a system that's going to be able to pay for itself in 3 to 5 years, and that's not a guarantee that it's the best thing to put in. So the best way to future-proof a system is to have a public sector backbone and work through that, and that'll give you the strength to manage the. And you're quite right about the fierce pace of change in the future. I was just reading today, of course, that now they're thinking of using airships and drones to generate signals overhead. Now, something like that is not going to be feasible in my books, but those are the things that are coming out. So you're quite right. You have to have a system that is future-proof, and the best way to do that is to have a public system that is being paid down over 25 years instead of a private sector one that's fragile and being paid down over 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Barry, that the plans that I've been working on show a return of investment of 25 years in general, a break-even point. And it includes as well the upgrades every 5 years of the telecommunication networks, meaning that when a TV or radio becomes obsolete, we can replace it. And that is part of the dollar figures that is being put in every 5 or every 10 years. Same happens for all these electrical systems that are in a container that needs to be serviced and needs to be replaced. All that money is planned in forehand, and we know exactly what is the amount of money we need to spend in 5 or 10 years from time to replace some of that equipment. The equipment doesn't exist yet. We don't know the price yet, but there is a fund in that whole plan available to upgrade the technology so that we are future-proofing. And to the point what Barry said, that is not what a commercial company will do. It is only what a community-owned or a community-governed network will do, because we want to make sure that we provide always the highest speed and the best services to the end users for a long term.
Thank you, Roel. The thing I might mention before we forget is that there's an employment factor here that we haven't mentioned. The network would probably be one that hires locally, and you might have a department, in fact, in the regional government that is in charge of that. Some of our clients have done that. Others have outsourced it. But either way, the employment stays in the region, and that's worth some consideration as well.
Director Gillis, you have further?
Nope, just wanted to say thank you.
No, that's the end of the questions for right now. Did you have any further presentation, or?
No.
I think you're definitely going to stimulate lots of conversation around the room anyway, and I wish to thank you for the presentation. Very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, for listening to us.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Oh, Director Elliott. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'll turn it back to Jamie and Director Elliott.
So I have a question about, well, first of all, let's go back a few years, and I'm going back quite a few years. When we decided to put television and radio in small communities in the North Valley, there wasn't any, okay? So we took that upon ourselves, and we did all the paperwork, and we all that kind of stuff. Okay, so as things went to the future, then people started to put in satellite systems that they did did some stuff and put up towers, and so they become obsolete, is what I'm trying to say. Although Steve's got one still running on radio, but the point that I'm trying to get at here is we did specified areas. Everybody got their radio and television, and they paid their money, and the regional district hired a contractor to keep them up. I can see this being the same kind of thing. It will not take very long, and we will either have a big IT group here looking after all this stuff, or each specified area is going to have a way of financing this through the general revenue of the regional district. And I think personally, from the kind of experience that I've had over the last few years, as soon as this is in, we're gonna have to have something else. Okay, now
Would you like a
Jamie,
response
it's
to
not
that?
really a question,
Yeah.
but would you, then, I guess I could put it into a question. Then would the TNRD take it over as a whole? Would you have each area as the specified area, or would you have each community as the specified area?
So that's a really good question. So on the service model, that hasn't been determined yet where we are in the process or part of their proposal. That would be the next step when we get into the business model. So the next, if you think back in their diagram, how they showed the different steps, and the one we've already completed, step 2 is the detailed business model, where we look at exactly that type of question of how can it be funded from an operational or from a capital point of view, and what is the structure, if any, from the tax base. So what's still a big question out there is there's a lot of different mechanisms for funding the capital for this. Once it's up and existing, think of, again, going back to the road model, you think of the road model, once the road is in place, yeah, there's maintenance costs, but in this example, the maintenance cost of the system should be covered by the fees that are being paid into it. So really all that we need to do is find, and I'm making it sound simple, I know it's not, but what we're trying to do is figure out a way to get the infrastructure in place so those homes are connected, and then after that, it takes care of itself. So with this funding announcement, for example, if there's a mechanism to have a large portion or all of infrastructure funded up front, and we partner with a group like iValley to make it happen, then that's a model that is very low risk, because then we don't even have to get into the service area question in terms of how it's being funded if there's no capital from the taxpayer needed.
I just want to add a little bit to that, if I could, Director Elliott. One of the things that we're wrestling with here is the model in terms of how we could put that infrastructure in place. But this major funding announcement, at this point, we don't know what the eligibility criteria is in terms of, is this money going to be available to local governments, or is it going to be funneled directly to service providers, for example? So we need to sort of figure out that end of it before we can advance the model, determine the best model going forward in terms of the current funding announcement, at least.
Mr. Chair, may I make one more?
Yeah, go ahead. Then I direct
So
Rice.
I would like to know then, if this money that's coming down, why can't we use a local service provider so that they can advance in their infrastructure?
So a local service provider would still be needing the same, they would still be connecting to the major telecom fiber network. Right? So that could be a model that the part of the business plan could be that we, as they mentioned there, we don't necessarily need to own it. We facilitate this using this technology as an example, and partner with a local service provider to make it, to find the funding to get that happening, to get those nodes built that the local service provider, for example, owns and operates. So we only work with them to develop it, and then we walk away 100%. That's one of the options that they presented. So that's a good idea. That's one of the options on the table. And just one comment on the technology thing, and I think a few people mentioned it about, well, what's coming next, and is this going to be obsolete? And I asked them that same question when I met with them initially and challenged them on that. And I mean, long story short, I've come around to accepting the fact is, regardless, you're making a decision. We're either making a decision to say, you know what, we're going to sit back and wait for the technology to catch up, and having to tell residents that, sorry, you got to wait until the technology gets better, or we be proactive about it. And that's not an easy decision, but who knows what's coming next? How do we guess? We know the needs there now, and this discussion's been around this table, I know, for many years of how to improve that.
I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but yes, I agree. It's coming down. Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Jamie, a couple quick observations and a question maybe. we're still running TV and radio here in Spencer's Bridge. The infrastructure's in place, a bare minimum. We got 2 TV channels and 1 radio station, CBC. And but the infrastructure still held my point. So I find this is a bit interesting business model for these small rural communities. That same type of infrastructure still exists in Lytton, for instance. And I imagine some of the, even though they're not in service in the other smaller communities in the regional district, I imagine the infrastructure is still there, which goes a little bit to the cost, as the gentleman was saying. But as far as the service providers, like TELUS leased their equipment to Looky-Loo for the service provider working out of Chilliwack and stuff like that. And the one issue that does happen is the maintenance and the repair calls. And so I'm just wondering, if this business model went into a community, the service calls, for instance, where would the responsibility lie there? It certainly wouldn't be the TELUS who they're leasing the fiber from. And so I'm just wondering if you have some comment on that.
Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, so good question. Yes, you're correct, Steve. Who's provided, so if TELUS is providing the fiber, they're not going to be doing the troubleshooting. It's that under this model, who we decide to be that intermediary direct service provider to the customer. So that under a model, it could be the regional district as its own department or a separate utility company set up, or we contract that out. Essentially, a private local service provider does that work on our behalf. That's probably the best model. They're the ones who collect the monthly fees from the customer, troubleshoot, but that company then is paying back to the regional district who owns the infrastructure a lease for that, the use of that node. That's the model that they presented.
Okay, I've got a follow up on that, if you don't mind. So let's just say we did this in Spencer's Bridge and stuff. And someone like myself who has 16 years of telecommunications, I could probably catch up pretty fast. Could I have a job after I retire from the TNRD as the repairman, maintenance guy in Spencer's Bridge, and be that service that maintenance backup? Could it go down to that level? Just an individual who has the expertise and has the tools and the meters they need to be that person, which is what you'd need. And I could see where one person could handle a small community as far as that role would be playing for maintenance and repair.
So the short answer is yes. In my discussion with iValley, they said that's the model actually that's most successful, is when you have a local in-community person or organization that's delivering the internet to their own community. They're the ones who have the most, quickest response time and then the biggest stake in it. So that is a model that would work.
Thank you.
Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess through to Jamie. Can we repurpose the TV rebroadcasting to include this?
Repurpose the service or the
service,
infrastructure?
yeah, if it was needed.
I don't know the answer to that question. I would guess not, because the service would be established under a bylaw for providing TV.
Okay, thanks. The reason I asked that is the TV broadcasting does own towers in Ebola and Blue River, and we still are using them, and it might fit.
From a service, like from a infrastructure point of view, we definitely can use the infrastructure.
Yeah.
But from a taxation service, we'd have to look at that.
I'm certainly willing to explore further how we can get this into the smaller areas. The concern I had, and I didn't voice it, was he talked about Stratford and Coquitlam and another community, Pictou. All are big communities. We're talking here about 30 to 90. And for my area, 33 is Ebola. And how do you serve them? One of these models might work. It's how you put it together. And I'm certainly willing to explore how to do that before we take it to the folks and see if they're interested. Blue River already has fiber. The rollout and connection has been a disaster. It turns out their contractors don't like snow. We'll just leave it at that. But so I'm certainly wanting to have do some more exploration of this. Where it goes, we'll have to wait and see. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's what we have to decide today, is to proceed forward, and then we'll have all the answers to this. And Director Laird has a question.
just a little bit of caution. When was the last time you tried to get a hold of the TELUS person to come to your house for service? So if we're owned, if this is a TNRD ownership, guess what? Our constituents will not support us without providing excellent service because they expect that. We've all accepted the way any of the communication companies run themselves, that if you're privately owned or owned by the public, they'll have an entirely different idea for service. And I don't think we even want to go there. All you have to do is look at the amount of problems with our water districts. Underfunded, not enough people on there to pay for it. I do agree with the need to get the fiber and everything out there, but I don't think we as a local government, we ever want to own or try and run something like that. Just horrendous. So just a word of caution.
Thank you. I think, do we have to make any decisions to proceed farther for Jamie to continue working on it or the staff to continue? Director Schaefer.
I'd just like to ask if we can have a copy of the presentation sent to us. Thank you.
To continue working on it, or we're going to continue working on this and bring back to the board for future decisions?
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of gauge the discussion here, but my intent was to continue discussion with iValley and talk to them a little more detail about what this business plan model would look like. That's the next step in terms of costing, looking into how we could fund that business plan step. So that's my next step from a staff point of view that I'm going to look into. So I'm planning to move forward on discussion with them. And we'll
Yes,
come
and I
back
think
to
that's
the board.
what we have to do. Director Elliott.
Thank you. Jamie, what happened to the guys that first presented the T and something?
Yeah, so Tanix.
Yeah,
Tanix is the one who did the report for us last year.
yeah.
And so the scope of their work was essentially to look at the state of the infrastructure we currently have and give us the report. So long story short, it's complete, their contract's done.
Okay.
They don't do this kind of work. They don't specialize in this kind of like solution. They were looking more high level of what the state of the TNRD was and where the needs were. So that whole needs assessment is completed.
Okay, and I would like to follow up with Director Laird's comments. I've been through this a couple of times over the last 20 years. Fiber optic cable has been down the North Valley since the early 70s, late 60s when we put the highway in. It's always been there. Nobody's ever said, okay, well, let's just tap into it, as they wouldn't let us. And so when we got rebroadcasting licenses for the Valley in the 70s, there's those rebroadcasting licenses sitting there. Exactly what Director Quinn has said now. There's no reason in God's green earth why they can't tap into that fiber optic cable if these five guys can. And they already own a rebroadcasting station. So I'm along the same line as David. I think that we're spinning our wheels. But anyway, well, that's just.
Thank you. We got Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, this is at initial steps and funding model has been, they said they're going to do a lot of heavy lifting on the funding model. They haven't put it on the TNRD at this point. And there's a lot of work left to do and a lot of exploring left to do to see where we're going to be at, if we can go further with this. And I certainly encourage Jamie to do so because I think it's very important with the way technology. TELUS has no competition in our area, Rogers in another area. Any competition is good. When you have nobody competing with you, you sort of have free reign and do it. You have to go through the CRTC, of course, but still, it doesn't give you many options. And Director Laird was right. You know, it takes you an hour just to get a hold of TELUS. And out here, it's if you get a repair call, it's with you probably got to wait about a month. And that's, I'm not exaggerating here, before you can get a repairman to come out here and fix your phone in Spencer's fridge. It's unacceptable. I don't think where something could be worse than that. The one question I have to you, Jamie, though, this is rolling out and they got this pilot project going in Williams Lake Are we sort of looking at that and see how that's going to be going, and at what stage are they with that pilot project in Williams Lake?
Yeah, good question, Director Rice. The Williams Lake project is definitely top of, that was something that piqued my interest the most, because this technology, although it's not new, the actual concept of these nodes, they haven't installed one yet. And this first one will be going in Williams Lake. I don't know the exact timing, but my understanding is it's supposed to be operational sometime this year. So we'll have a pilot that we can look to nearby. And that is a very rural, remote community. It's out Alexis Creek area.
So you're sort of monitoring that a little bit and sort of seeing how that's rolling out, which I think is a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. My first thing I told them was we don't want to guinea pig new technology. If no one else has done it, why would we want to be the first? That was my question to them.
Director Laird. Your speaker. Your speaker.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have had personal experience with CRTC, and you have no idea the amount of licensing, the amount of control they have over licensing exactly what we're talking about, because they have to look at right across the board is who has CRTC rights in our area already, how are they going to be accommodated, if there's room for another provider. It's a very long list of things that you have to do. And it's you can't just brush them off. That's a whole other level of government, and they don't have any rules or regulations on how quick they respond and how quick to make decisions. So CRTC is a huge stumbling block, and they just sort of brush it off as you get started right away, and CRTC will jump online. Won't happen because of the already licensed areas that CRTC is basically giving people the right to make a living in. So it's not quite as simple as what he's explaining.
And I think Jamie will have a job ahead of him. So I think that seems to be all the questions on that. So I'll turn it back to Jamie for fire protective services training.
Right, thank you. So switching gears away from broadband and on to fire departments. So this is I'm going to give a brief presentation here, and this is a follow-up to discussion that happened at the fall Electoral Area Directors Committee meeting. And if you recall, Jason presented sort of an idea around doing some in-house training. Where we ended that discussion was there was some, at least my recollection, there was some good discussion, but didn't have any clear direction coming forward on that. So I wanted to sort of fine tune that discussion a little bit more here, have the have further question and answer period, and then get some direction from this committee. So what we're talking about is a new function, we'll call it, or initiative that's fire department training, in-house training, as well as Fire Smart initiative. So there's three main objectives of this function. One would be to administer training programs for all 8 of our TNRD administered fire departments, possibly 9 following an upcoming referendum. Second is offer training modules to non-TNRD fire departments within the TNRD. So this could be member municipality departments, improvement districts, or the fire brigades, if you will, that are volunteer departments not run by the TNRD. And 3, to deliver a region-wide, so including all electoral areas, Fire Smart program. I'm just going to touch on what each of those 3 things would look like. So the current status of our fire department training. So currently we have ongoing training and certification to meet OFC playbook standards. So we're already doing this. The way it's delivered is primarily through consultants, training consultants, contractors that come in to deliver the training. And in some departments, we're fortunate enough to have retired career firefighters who are certified to deliver the training. So we're being able to deliver that by them as volunteers. Annual budget for all 8 departments is a total of $128,000. And so the direct consultant cost is roughly between $75,000 and $100,000. It's been lower in the past few years due to COVID, and we're also gaining some efficiencies essentially by having volunteers who our retired career firefighters were able to deliver that at no charge. Some of the challenges that we're having though is that the consultant availability, there's a limited number of consultants that provide these training, and their availability to actually schedule them in. So they do a road trip through the interior, and if you can't fit in the training, then they'll maybe catch you on their way back through a month or two later. So that's a challenge. And then the cost, obviously we're paying consulting fees and travel costs for that training. So what do we propose? And again, this is picking up on what Jason and Ron discussed at the last meeting, is that an option is that we can look at providing all the training in-house by a certified trainer. So it would be funded from existing training budget. So we're not talking about any new cost. We're just talking about switching what we're currently paying consultant to devoting to in-house costs for this program. So the benefits to that would be essentially more and better training for the same costs. We have efficiency, less travel time, lower cost per training session, and better training because we have a consistent same trainer that can work directly with each fire chiefs and have an ongoing program. We'll also have better accessibility and flexibility for required certifications. So the current challenges sometimes now is, if we're coming up to the end of certification, we have to make sure that we have a training program scheduled to meet all those required certifications. This would be a lot easier to manage this way if we're not relying on third-party consultants. So the second function, the non-TNRD fire departments, well, the current status is it's kind of all over the map depending on the size of the department, but many are similar to TNRD fire departments where they contract out training to consultants, and they also are challenged by the same things with cost and availability of trainers. So this model would propose that we can offer certified training modules directly to those fire departments in the region. Model could be, the proposed model is full cost recovery from member municipalities. And then we could have subsidized rates for improvement districts and non-TNRD fire departments. So the benefits is, this is one mechanism that we can support those fire departments, all fire departments in the region, especially outside the municipal boundaries. And again, better accessibility and flexibility for required certification. So the same benefit to our TNRD owned fire departments as well as all the regional departments. And then the benefit back to the TNRD is there's cost recovery funding that can go back into the TNRD fire department's budgets to be used elsewhere, or again, for more or better training programs. So the third component is regional fire smart program. So this is kind of what's been added in since the discussion in the fall when we're looking at this model. So this program, or sorry, the proposal is to have essentially the other half of this function devoted to a regional fire smart program. So what fire smart is, it's well, I was looking at this yesterday, and it's kind of hard to lump it into one or two sentences. It's a province-wide program, but there's a whole component for local governments and First Nations, as well as a public and homeowner education aspect. But I guess the main take home of how this program functions is that it's provincially managed, but needs to be delivered by local governments for homeowners to get the best, essentially, bang for their buck out of the programs. There's a whole bunch of grant programs built into it, funding availability, and as well as the whole education piece. And it's specifically related to fireproofing private properties from wildfire. Yeah, so examples of types of programs included within FireSmart is that education components, community planning, even funding for development considerations, like working with development services departments and local governments to look at FireSmart programs, interagency cooperation funding, emergency planning, training and cross-training, and right down to actual like critical infrastructure projects, fuel management, FireSmart activities in residential areas. So the current status is, I want to break this up. First of all, within fire protection areas, there's varying degrees of the Fire Smart program being delivered. So fire departments directly can deliver this program. Many municipalities are very actively engaged to this, some more than others. Within our own TNRD fire departments, this is a component of the work that the fire chief and the volunteers do. But keep in mind, that's only limited to the fire protection area. Jason, I was asking Jason yesterday and we ran the numbers. The TNRD fire departments cover about 200 square kilometers of the TNRD electoral areas of the 45,000 square kilometers. So just to put in perspective, so those areas that aren't covered by a fire department, essentially there is zero Fire Smart program available to them. There's no delivery, there's no one who's delivering that program. So other than homeowners being able to go online and look at those resources and watch the videos, there's nothing further being done. Further to that, this is something that Jason's phone rings regularly from communities that are interested in something like this, and maybe chasing some fire, hear about Fire Smart funding and wanting to know how do we go about doing that. And we right now don't have any capacity to assist those communities. So most recently we had inquiry from the Lac Lejeune community interested in a program like this. So what we're proposing is that this function delivers a regional Fire Smart program, including all electoral areas, regardless of fire protection status. Now the Fire Smart program is, without getting into detail, there's a lot of different avenues that can go down. So it could definitely ramp up to requiring many staff or even seasonal staff. But I just want to clarify that under that model, if there was more staffing required, that would be funded directly from Fire Smart grants. So we're looking at a presentation from the City of Penticton, who has a really successful program, and they have 4 seasonal staff that are fully funded by this Fire Smart program. So the benefits of this is obviously increased fire prevention and preparedness across the DNRD, and in particular, again, in those areas that don't have any fire department and there's no engagement with them. The other benefit is there's grant funding available for these programs. The grant funding is for program delivery as well as resources. And an important note, which I'll talk about in the next slide, is it includes staffing costs, the grant funding. And it's an existing program, so it's kind of an off-the-shelf program. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, create something new here. This is just waiting for local government to pick up and deliver the aspects of the program that we would want and the community wants. So without getting too deep into it, but what on a high level, what it looked like. So obviously staffing resources, we're talking about a full-time staff, or even it could be contracted out position, half of their time devoted to the fire department training, half the time devoted to the Fire Smart program. So how would it be funded? Essentially the same split. So 50% would be funded out of existing budget, so no new cost. Existing budget from those fire departments would fund the training aspect of it. The other 50% would be funded through the EA admin function. Again, because the Fire Smart would be region-wide in all areas. Now, I clarify that's the worst case scenario here, because in looking at the Fire Smart program application for 2021, all incremental staffing costs are eligible under their grant program. So there's very high likelihood that if grants are successful year after year, the full staffing costs could be funded, full being the full 50% of the staffing costs could be funded by the Fire Smart program. However, I wanted to present worst case scenario because if we move forward with a model like this, we wouldn't want to have a function that every year is contingent on the success of a grant or how much the province is funding the Fire Smart program year after year. In general, it appears to be an annual grant program that you apply for every year. And in addition to that, there's also, again, revenue from external training that this person could provide to municipalities and non-TNRD departments that again would offset costs. So just in summary, the proposed function is threefold: administer the training program for TNRD departments, offer training to non-TNRD departments, and deliver the region-wide Fire Smart program. So the question that I want to leave the committee with in terms of for next steps is there interest in this model? And then more specifically, is there interest for staff bringing a report and recommendation to the TNRD board that would go into more details? As you know, this is just a high level presentation. I didn't get into the exact costing and what it would look like. That would all come in a report if you want us to proceed with that.
Thank you. Okay, we have 4 people lined up here right now. We got Director Laird.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a
Right.
question on the staff training. I was lucky enough to be involved in our local fire department for about 4 years. And what we used to do in the Merritt Fire Department, if there was an opportunity to go to another community to learn, so that we didn't have to pay for a trainer to come in, because there's many different aspects of training in the fire department. I don't know if you could find one trainer that would be capable of satisfying all the requirements in a full fire department. But there is the opportunity, it could possibly be cheaper to send your staff to an existing program that's all running and you don't have to try and fit it in. We used to come to Kamloops and use their facility quite often, and they always had different training going on. And that's something I think we need to look at as far as the training goes. And I had another one there, but I've forgotten it. But that's a key thing, is the fact that trainers are, and if you get a hold of the local municipal fire departments, quite often they'll have a trainer that's coming through doing one specific topic, and you'll be able to send, and you don't send your whole department, you pick out 2 or 3 key people, and then they can bring the information back and share it with the rest of the staff at our fire departments. Just a thought.
Thank you. Director Watson.
Thank you. One of the biggest issues in my neighborhood is absentee owners. And so 5 acres of tinderbox, fallen trees and long grass, and still residue from the pine beetle. And it's a heck of a mess. Is there any way we can get that cleaned up? Not by the cost, not with the cost of it going to the property owner. I would also like to know if we could take a resolution to UBCM asking the province to influence insurance companies for a break on fire insurance policies if the property owner has effectively fire smarted their property, and have that inspected by a fire official.
Jamie.
So I'm glad you brought that up. Thanks for that, Director Watson. And maybe Jason can speak to it better, but there is actually already discussion afoot of in Canada having fire insurance reductions in certified fire smart communities. So there's already a model like this in the US, and that's what we're looking there. My understanding is they're looking at in Canada as well. So similar to how you have a reduction if you're in fire protection, the part of the Fire Smart program is a certification program. So a community reaches certification. And so at this point, there's not a reduction, but that's something that I guess is in the works. I don't know if you have more info on that.
Sure, thank you. Definitely, as Jamie alluded to, it's alive and well in the US, and it's something that's Fire Smart Canada, which links into Fire Smart BC and then down to the local level, has been lobbying to try to get the insurance companies to recognize Fire Smart communities, to reduce those premiums, to ultimately give that carrot to the private homeowner at the end of the day. The other piece that I've been doing some preliminary research, Regional District of Central Kootenay, through the Fire Smart program, has a $500 rebate program, they call it, where homeowners can be active on their own private property to do fire smart activities, and then on inspection of those activities being completed in a proper manner, can apply to get a $500 rebate from the local government, and then that's funded through Fire Smart. So there's some other creative opportunities to engage private homeowners.
How do you get a rebate for something you haven't paid for?
Well, fair question. The rebate is through the Fire Smart program, so they're trying to promote people to roll up their sleeves and go out into their yards and do Fire Smart approved activities, which are all prescribed in a program that already exists. And then a Fire Smart representative would inspect that property and confirm that that work had been done. And they, without getting too deep into the weeds with this, the owners identify how many labor hours went into that, and then there's a payback essentially in goodwill from the Fire Smart program, and then the confirmation that the work was completed.
Thanks, Jason. Okay, I got Director Gillis.
Thank you. I just have a question for Mr. Vieira. You had one FTE for the training program, as I understood it, for the in-house training. And then you got into Fire Smart, and you're talking about an FTE who would be 50% training and 50% Fire Smart. Are we talking about the same person? Or would we have the advantage of a full-time employee for the training alone, and another one 50-50?
No, so maybe I misspoke. Yeah, it would be one person, one FTE that would be 50% devoted to Fire Smart and 50% to training. So one FTE total in this function.
So you talked about a budget of $128,000, if I recall. Then you also said that the Fire Smart portion would be funded through grants. So are you saying we would save substantially on this?
Yeah, to be blunt, there's a potential that it would be zero net cost to the TNRD. 50% funding within the existing budget of fire departments. And then the proposal would be the other 50% is approved to be funded from the EA admin function. However, every year we could apply for funding through the Fire Smart program. And if successful, then there would be no net cost to the EA admin function.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Jamie. I am very interested in this, because after all the fires around us last summer, I have more people saying to me, why can't we have a fire department? Why can't we have a Fire Smart? The lady from Lac Lejeune that got hold of you was because I told her to, or asked her to. And we have 2 or 3 people in Cherry Creek that really want to do this. And I think that fact that it would be put together properly so that people are not going out and saying, oh, I can do that and I can do that. I mean, the training for Fire Smart has got to be the same. So yes, I would love to see this happen.
Thank you. Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, given that, the wildfires are the rule, not the exception, I would suggest every year we're going to have wildfires. Just the magnitude is the only thing in question. And big shout out to Jamie and Jason and staff for coming forward with this. I mean, I not only interested in the model, but and bring a report and recommendation to the board. I think it's a little late to the gate, but we got there, and let's do this. And if we can do it at zero cost, all that much better and stuff like that. But I got a couple of questions about the certification and stuff, like for non-TNRD fire departments. Our fire department right down here is jumping through some real hoops to get somebody down here for training, and found a gentleman in Chase who's qualified to train. However, can't be down till June and will not even come unless the First Nations bands and the improvement district reach an agreement. He won't do any training. So this also comes at a good time, I think, because it sort of gives an option for these non-TNRD fire departments to get at least work towards certification. And that's my next question, certification. Since small rural fire departments are never going to reach playbook standards. We all know that. And can they still get certain certifications, like going through the modules that you mentioned, Jamie, as far as, so if they completed, as far as volunteer fire department completed all those modules and stuff like that and got that certification, and even though they still would not meet a number of the other playbook standards, where does that put them? Do you know where that puts them, not only in the fire protection zone, but also in the insurance zone, which was brought up by Director Watson? Because you know, the insurance question is a big one for us in areas where we don't really have fire. Well, the rating is the lowest you can get without not having their rating. So we can get some insurance, but insurance, and some people can't get insurance at all, but it's very high. So those are my concerns. And but this seems like it might go a ways to addressing both those concerns.
Thank you, Steve. Director Schaefer.
I think we had a response to his question.
Oh, yeah.
Chair.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll take a stab at that. There's a lot of stuff packaged there, but I'll take a stab at some of it for sure. When it comes to meeting the playbook standards, I think it is quite achievable for the improvement district fire departments or non-fire department, TNRD fire departments to meet those standards. I think what it comes down to is having the proper organized training modules and delivery systems in place. So when the firefighters come to training night, that training is delivered in a effective manner, and then the resources are also there for the fire chief, or if the fire chief has delegated a training officer within whichever fire department, they can rely on that coordination from a regional kind of model to help support their training needs throughout their training matrix. But by all means, the whole reason the playbook was created was because before that, the standard was an NFPA 1001 standard, which was fairly complex, and all volunteer fire departments in the province use that same rationale as this is too complicated, it takes too much time, it takes too much money, we're not going to meet that standard. So they never tried to achieve it. Of course, on the heels of that, there was firefighter deaths on the fire ground, which were investigated, and based off the coroner's recommendations, went back to the Office of the Fire Commissioner. And then they broke the 1001 standard down into 3 segments, so smaller volunteer departments could achieve at least an exterior level training, so they would have that safety level. So it's doable. It just, I think, needs to be coordinated in a way that is achievable.
Thank you. Follow up real quick, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Director.
Okay,
Rice.
thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, Jason. And so my next question would then be, you know, as you mentioned, subsidized possible training. And I'm wondering, would there be subsidized? So say this volunteer fire department, you know, the modules is a tough thing for small communities, because then you're expecting your volunteer fire department to sit down and, you know, go to school for a little while and get those modules completed. But would there be some possibilities of even using, say, discretionary funds or subsidized funding or anything to actually physically have a trainer come down there and get their training in person for like an improvement district, whether it's Savannah or Spence's Bridge or whatever and stuff like that? I think in-person training is not only more effective, but I think it's probably better at the end of the day. So that's my question.
Any further reply to?
Yeah, I reply to that, Director Rice. So yeah, the training of non-TNRD departments, yeah, we could look at different models there. You know, I suggested the subsidized for the non-municipal departments, under the idea that it may be partly funded through the EA admin function. So justifiably, if all the EAs are paying towards it, then there would be a benefit for those rural departments. So we could look at different models there, is I guess the short answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Schaefer.
Just a comment is that I have 2 fire departments in my area, and the fire chiefs are very stringent on what they do, and they do a lot of training. And ours are trained up to date, and they try to keep up to date. So they do a very good job. And I'm sure every one of the TNRD fire departments is like that. Also, I am very interested in this model because I feel that if somebody can go around and help everybody else out in their fire departments and get training, it'd be great. And also, I know in our in our Blackpool Fire Department, our fire chief, if he can't do the training, he brings somebody in to do the training. And I think that's pretty well what would happen here too. If you can't do the training, somebody will come in. And so I really am interested in this model. And so I'd like more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Chairman. In Blue River's case, the fire department is a non-TNRD one. It trains on a regular basis. I don't know what the status of it is. When this subject first came up, I think Jason spoke to the fire chief up there. They don't want to become a regional district fire department, but they would be interested in participating in training. And I would suggest, maybe you can elaborate on what they actually spoke about with fire chief in Blue River. But I would think that they might be interested in doing on a fee for service basis.
Jason?
Yes, thank you. For sure, based on our last delivery of this to this group, you're right, Director Quinn, one of your asks was to reach out to the Blue River Fire Chief and have the discussion, which I did. He was very receptive to the idea of having regional training support and was totally supportive of the idea and concept of it, and didn't see any issues other than it would give him more opportunity to develop his fire department.
So thank you for that. So there is interest out there from other fire departments that aren't regional district ones. On Fire Smart, Blue River particularly has gained, I'm not quite sure how it was done, but Flinrow, I think that's the name of that department, has money to do fire smarting, and they've done 3 areas around Blue River. And the fire department in Blue River gained a grant under Fire Smart to do some in-town stuff, which they've done. Our biggest problem is the same as Director Watson. Non-property owners or non-resident property owners have messy fire hazards, and we need to find some way of getting those folks to clean it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Rothenberger.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I too am very interested in exploring this model further. I know that there's a lot of interest in our rural areas for more Fire Smart, and I'm sure that there would also be a lot of interest on the part of fire brigades for more training opportunities, and this is a model that I think would present that. My question was actually around subsidized rates and a bit of an elaboration on that, on how that might work, because it does strike me that this would run smack into our past policy on providing no help whatsoever to fire brigades, and this would be a form of subsidization. Everything we've heard from the province is that we shouldn't be concerned about that our policy of our no help policy is not current or necessary, and so we'd have to maybe revisit that and do away with it. But can you say anything further about what a subsidized rate would look like? So I assume that the fire brigade through its bake sales would raise enough money to pay for part of the cost of a training module, and we would somehow subsidize the rest, or is there a chance for 100% subsidy?
I guess I'll start with saying, yeah, there's a one of the models is to look at just 100% subsidy for those departments. The question that we need to dig in a little bit more prior to bringing this, formal recommendation forward would be around that liability question. So the idea is that, the model is that arm's length, that we have a trainer who's certified to provide this training, and those external departments could schedule that training, and we come in, deliver that module and leave, so it's not taking ownership of their training program, if you will. It's just delivering X training, the ladder training course, for example. So that's the model we're looking at. But to the subsidized rate, I guess that's still up for discussion. It could be fully funded by the EA. It could be a decision of the board that the costs associated with that go to the EA admin function and funded by that service, or a partial way, it's 50% subsidized, or full cost recovery model. That would be up with the options that I could see.
Thank you. I got Director Watson.
Thank you. And don't you hate it when Director Rothenberger and I are on the same page? Do we need to change our policy about steering clear of our unfortunately challenged communities and start to realize that they do need our help as a regional district?
I think that question we would have to answer very clearly if we brought this forward to the board.
I can comment as well. I would say that training the independent fire departments and fire brigades is quite different than funding them. The funding model ends up looking like a service of the TNRD, right? Because we're giving money to allow it, well, perceived. The perception might be that we're giving money to this fire department. We don't know what they're doing with it, what kind of level of training they're using the money for, if they're using the money to buy equipment that perhaps is faulty. Like we just have no control over that. And to have control over that may, according to advice that we've been given in the past, may create this assumption that we have the authority, we are the authority having jurisdiction. Whereas a training model, as Jamie said, is just training. We have a certified trainer that goes in and trains them and comes out. So we have no control over what they do with that training. It's really just a sole training model. So, I mean, we have to look into it a bit further, but I see that as the training model is quite different from a funding model.
Thank you. Director Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this committee ask staff to bring forward a report and recommendations to the TNRD board with respect to the proposed fire protection service training.
Second. Discussion, Director Rothenberger.
I was just gonna clarify on the question between training and funding models that previously the issue came up because we were providing discretionary funding to some fire departments for buying new pumps, for example, or whatever. So it was very specifically targeted. But if we are free to distinguish between that, buying a new pump, and providing some training, and it doesn't fall within the same issue, that'd be great. It'll take some fancy wordsmithing, I think, to do that.
If there's any further discussion on the motion, all in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. Now I think we're going to TNRD newsletter by Colton.
I need to turn this on. That's okay then. Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Was asked by senior staff for our department to give an update on planning that we're working on for essentially a region-wide newsletter in the TNRD. So going to go through some of the considerations we've made, some of the examples we've looked at, and then show you what we are planning to do and invite any feedback that you as directors might have. So in our 2020-2022 strategic plan, it outlines that a regular newsletter, as an action item, it reads that a regular newsletter would provide education and transparency on TNRD activities, to residents and taxpayers. You might remember in an update that was received to the entire board in January with our strategic plan progress. We had this as not yet started. So we would change that in update on our entire strategic plan. Obviously, we've started this now. A newsletter would help build awareness of the TNRD services and how the TNRD serves residents in different areas, and would provide a consistent source of information on services, news, and offer engagement for residents throughout the region, or promote engagement for residents in the region. There's a few different models on how we could create a newsletter that would be or potentially would be feasible. Our preferred option as staff is a front and back page, so a double-sided newsletter. We've floated the idea of a front page, a 2-page insert, and a back page, so we would call that a 2-page spread. We do some newsletters like that already, which are a little more in depth or a little more community focused and not so much region-wide, distributed on a smaller scale. The whole point with the newsletter in terms of contents, crisp, concise text with engaging and relevant visuals as well that match the content that we're highlighting, promoting, trying to make residents aware of across the region. So contents can be updates on service changes, opportunities for engagement, could have important dates, in election, for example, general election this year. Factual information about the TNRD to help boost awareness and general knowledge of the services we provide. A double-sided page would be about 6 items with photos, room for a header title as well. So we've considered a few different options for how to distribute. Staff, we would prefer semi-annually. There would be significant cost considerations for keeping in mind for the amount that we mail out, and also to who we mail it out to, how often and to who we mail it out to. We've had to ask ourselves, would we send this to residents just in electoral areas, residents in electoral areas and Indigenous communities, or would we send it to residents in the whole region? And I'll get into it in a little bit here, but we would prefer at this point to physically mail it out to just electoral areas. We would be able to potentially post physical copies as well in community spaces, like libraries, community bulletin boards that may exist in different parts of the region, or make available in other public facilities, public or private businesses upon request. For personal residents who wouldn't have this mailed out to them, we could also accommodate making this available upon request for mailing to them directly. We do have newsletters that are already mailed out, as I've mentioned, but when it comes to mailing out for certain services, but our services vary so much, not just even by EA, but by communities within the EAs, that doubling up might not be feasible. For example, we send out a semi-annual Waterworks newsletter to our 11 community water system users, but that only captures such a small portion of residents. So, mailing out, for example, like that wouldn't quite be as effective as when a municipality like the city of Kamloops is able to do that, because they provide uniform services. Regardless of how we mail out, this would be very cost effective and easy to do internally for distributing electronically on a wide scale. So we could utilize our current email marketing system, Cyber Impact, which we send our current newsletters to, and other news releases and similar information. We would definitely create a dedicated web page to archive these newsletters. Through our social media accounts, we can boost that way as well. I think mail out would be most effective. Physically putting it in people's mailboxes, of course, make sure in our rural areas that it actually reaches all corners of the regional district, especially as you've heard today, where, as it's well known, our internet, for example, may be challenged. I have 4 different examples to show, just to give a visual representation. The city of Kamloops distributes this 4 times per year. They're able to distribute it with their utility bills to residents, so they double up, like I mentioned before, something that makes it streamlined for them from a mailing perspective and gets to every doorstep. It's a two-sided newsletter, which is what we're currently looking at doing. And they distribute this electronically as well. And it's pretty easy to find when they do make it available. The Caribou Regional District takes an interesting model here. They distribute a twice annual newsletter like we're proposing, but they do a 2-page spread. So it's twice the material. And it is mailed to every address in their region, whether that's EAs, IRs, or municipal residents. So they cover almost twice as much ground as we do in terms of the area that they serve. They're at 80,000 square kilometers. So I'd imagine there are some challenges with distribution when it comes to economies of scale. This is easy to find on their social media, their website as well when they put that up. The Regional District of Nanaimo takes an interesting approach here. They distribute this monthly, and it's double-sided, like again what we're proposing, so 2 pages. And they actually distribute this with their 3 local newspapers, distributed electronically as well. But that's not something that I would recommend for our region, just based on how vast we are. Population-wise, they're larger than us, not terribly larger, but much more condensed. Our region is 20 times the size of the RDN. So between just the amount of area we have, but also the amount of publications and also the cost, I've kind of determined that it would be more feasible through Canada Post than actually going through newspapers. The Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen, just to give you an example, they do this just on their website, but they also make, so it's entirely text-based compared to the other ones I showed you. They do make this available as a poster and put it up in certain areas of their region, which I do like. I would want us to be a little bit more direct in terms of getting a newsletter to residents through mail out. This is good in terms of the content. If you read through it, there's about 4 or 5 items, which, and again, they put this out monthly. But in terms of reach, mail out is probably a better option for us. So what staff are suggesting from communications is a double side, and this is just a draft, so don't take the text in here. We've just pulled this from other random newsletters as fact here for what we would do. This is just how it would look. But what we're proposing is a double-sided full color newsletter that we would distribute twice a year. And based on efficiency and the need to, but also the need to reach rural residents, we would want this to reach our electoral area addresses, and we would consider posting in public places as well. Again, community facilities, libraries, for example. We would set up a TNRD website and have it available through our social media channels as well to reach that. And we would also look at emailing through our email distribution, email marketing. And we have, at last check, almost 3,400 email accounts on that. So there would be some reach there as well. We have a lot of competing priorities right now in communications with large projects, but in terms of preparing and getting the first one out the door right now, we'd be looking at mid-September. So short, that's all I had. And just to give you an update on what we're looking at proceeding with later this year from communications, and happy to take any questions or feedback.
Director Rothenberg.
Thanks. Well, printed newspapers, as we all know, will soon be a thing of the past totally. And I'm still in mourning over that upcoming event, which is going to be upon us soon. But whether it's printed or electronic form, are you aware of any surveys of existing newsletters that have been done on actual readership? Is there any feedback that's been received by any of them as to what percentage of people will actually pick it up and read it or look at it electronically?
I could look into that, certainly, Director Rothenberger. One thing that we could consider when we do begin this is giving residents at the same time an opportunity to survey about how likely you would be to use this, how often you would want to receive it, and what you would want to see in it. I could check in with different local and regional governments about how they have canvassed that information. It's quite easy to do in terms of at least garnering usage online. That's quite easy to do in terms of looking at metrics and gaining feedback that way. But that would be a potential avenue to explore for sure.
That would be very useful because I suspect that it'd be very, very low. But as part of that, I'd be interested to know what kind of content might get more interest and what might get less. And if any of that type of surveying has been done, I'm sure that would hopefully have been part of it on existing ones.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to see that when I read through the contents of not just the examples I showed you, but other newsletters by governments. And for example, something that greatly affects one part of a region, but doesn't affect the entire region, Say, for example, in our area would be a referendum for fire protection service establishment that would be coming up. Those kinds of items that are larger scale, but don't necessarily affect all of the residents who would receive that seem to be included in all of those newsletters.
Just a final quick comment. I think newsletters that are tailored to a specific issue or project or area, yes, I think people are interested in that, but on a broad basis, what's happening in the TNRD, much less so. If it's not immediate to them, I think the interest is much lower.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's what we would be looking at right now in terms of the content would probably capture a mix of that. For example, updates on service or urging residents to use Voint Alert, for example, would generally affect the entire region. But I do see what you mean, absolutely.
Director Watson.
Thank you. As a Canada Post employee in 70 Mile House, I had the opportunity to deliver the Caribou Regional District newsletter. And they kind of cheated. They sent it to TNRD residents in the area too. And out of that, I got a lot of complaints about the TNRD not having a newsletter. And so people are reading it and they're mad because we're not doing it. On the other newsletters and people answering them, our MP sends out newsletters with a slip that you can cut off and answer questions or send in information. And an amazing amount of them are sent back. I mean, sent in to the MP. So people are reading them. I do live in a community that's mostly seniors. So maybe that's the demographic that we're looking for.
Thanks for that comment, Director Watson. And I can see why your area would be included with the CRDs, I guess, because you're included in their OCP in that part, I believe. But right. And that's the whole point of a mail out in a lot of ways, is people are more likely to read it if it does show up in their mail and that sort of thing as well.
Director Rice.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for this, Colton. Yeah, I think anytime you can step up your level of transparency, it's a good thing for the regional district and any entity as far as that goes. And this would certainly do that. I also sort of agree with Director Watson. I think these get read a lot. We have a newsletter exactly like what you are showing here, coming every 2 weeks because of the highway rebuild, and they have pictures and before and afters, but a lot of print, sort of bullet point, right to the point and stuff like this. And I'll tell you what, it's one of the most demanded things. They are waiting for it to come in on Monday. It gets your Monday and Tuesday. It was every week. Now it's every 2 weeks. And I yeah, it's an emergency situation, but I think there's still a demand for that, and the transparency, I think, is an important thing. But I do think we should at least consider, I don't know how much more staff time it would take to do one page quarterly every 3 months. I think twice a year and just two-sided. I think if you're putting pictures on there, and I would almost encourage putting pictures on there, it's sort of hard to get two sides of print. A lot of people that might go in the waste can more often than not. But if you have the pictures there and a nice newsletter interspersed with some writing and stuff like that, I would think my only thoughts are just twice a year, it might not be enough room to just have front and back of one side. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Director Rice. And a lot of the reason for the biannual as a starting point or semi-annual is taking into account cost considerations. It's certainly cost effective to look at doing this for just the electoral areas and the near 15,000 addresses that are included in that. So it is something we could explore once we do get it sorted out. It just means that distributing it 4 times a year instead of twice would mean double the cost for mailing and printing. But overall, I believe I'd have to iron that out, but I believe it would be less than $10,000 for the whole year to do quarterly. And again, once it's started and the template's in place, it is less straining on staff resources to be able to distribute that. So I can look closer into that, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you need anything further, Colton?
I wasn't looking for a recommendation. This was just for information and seeking feedback, as I know that this is an initiative, again, that's in as staff, our strategic plan, and something that many directors have been interested in and inquiring about.
Thank you. Any further discussion for Colton on this? I think it's a good idea, and I look forward to coming back to the regular board with it.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, now we're down to, I don't know what they want to do. It says round table, but we're also into lunch hour, are we? So Scott, what's the?
Lunch is here. It's actually in the boardroom just down the hall. So unless there's anything urgent, it's totally up to you, Chair, on how you want to proceed.
So does anybody have a round tables issue they wanted to bring up, or should we just adjourn and go for lunch? All in favor of that? Thank you.